Hi, I'm Chip Hardwick. I'm the Synod exec for the Synod of the Covenant. I want to welcome you to this preaching workshop. We're really excited to have Shauna Hannan here. I'll introduce her more fully in a minute, but Shauna, we're glad that you're here. We're glad that each of you is here that are here live now in the Zoom, and all of you who will watch it later. We're so glad to see you this morning. I'm going to share some things that are going on in the life of the Synod to support you and your churches and your presbytery. And first, I've got to find where the share button went to. Here we go. All right. Oh, no, with Zoom, they're always changing things to keep us on our toes. Ian, do you see that? Shauna, Charles, do you see that yet? Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Now I need to figure out how to. Why is this not wanting to advance? Let me try that again. I know this is in a workshop about filmmaking. It seems like there should be a better option for how to do this well.
Oh, you just set me up for my Zoom skills, Chip.
All right, let's try this again now. Participants can see. Come on.
That's weird.
Is not wanting
What if you like scroll down to the bottom left? Yeah, there it shows the advanced. Oh, would that work?
Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Thank you, Shauna. You do have the Zoom skills.
Sure.
I want to remind you all that our motto in the Synod is, in our Synod, we'll try anything to equip leaders who attend to God's creative, emerging future. And we've got some new ministries that are starting this year that I wanted to make sure that you all were aware of. The first section are ways that we're working to equip leaders in the new year. The first one is a new ministry for commissioned ruling elders, commissioned pastors. It's a Zoom training. And the first one is on February 19th. It's called Leadership as Process with Dr. Robert McManus, who's the leadership professor at Muskingum University. It's on February 19th. And then on March 12th, Kimberly Ashby, who is a pastor in the Ann Arbor area, is going to lead on emotional intelligence. We've learned that commissioned ruling elders and commissioned pastors often don't have the same amount of Con Ed opportunities as ministers of word and sacrament. And so we're excited to offer these. And if you've got questions, you can contact our commissioned ruling elder coordinator, Tim, at synodofthecovenant.org. All of this information is on our website, by the way. Another new thing, I know this is very late notice, but we'd love to have you if you are available for critical cultural competency. This is an introductory anti-racism training that we're offering with Crossroads. It's February 11th and 12th from 1 to 5, or February 21st and 22nd. You can see the times. That's a Friday late afternoon into early evening, and Saturday around noon. One of our goals and hopes for our Synod is that we will become more and more effective in our anti-racism work. We are deep in the throes of interviewing for associate exec for anti-racism, and we're working in ways to prepare for that person's coming. It becomes, it seems like it becomes more obvious every day that our culture here in America is toxic, has toxic polarization. And to help counter this, our partner Science for the Church has presented a 3-part workshop. The one that was most recent was called The Psychology of Polarization, Polarization in the Groups We Join. There were 3 of these. They're on our YouTube channel, and I'd encourage you to check those out. And finally, our boundaries training for 2025 is Child Sexual Abuse Prevention Workshop. This is required for all teaching and active ruling elders by the Book of Order now. The cost is completely covered by the Synod and the presbyteries, and here are the dates. Your presbyteries have these also, and they're all, of course, again, on our website. Now I want to move to some of the things we're doing to equip preachers. The Cultivating the Gift of Preaching initiative is our training program for lay preachers. It's an 18-month cohort program which seeks to identify, train, and support emerging preachers in the Synod of the Covenant. And we are taking applications now for the next cohort, which begins in June. If you have people in your congregations that you believe have the gift of proclamation but haven't had the chance to be trained in that yet, I'd encourage you to reach out to them and tell them about this program. We're also looking for mentors that will work with the cohort groups. So if you are interested in doing that, you can also find an application on our website for that. We are hoping to have about 30 or 35 participants this year, and would love for some of the people that you know to be in the program. Another new ministry that we have coming is the lectionary discussion group. This actually came out of the January preaching workshop where people mentioned that they enjoyed working together in groups and wanted to explore having a lectionary discussion group. So thanks to Debbie Dockstader, who's on the call. Let's give Debbie some happy hands. Debbie, we're grateful for you. She worked with Heather, our office manager, who is a graduate of San Francisco Seminary, to put together an opportunity for people to come together for a lectionary study group. It's the second and fourth Wednesdays from 10 to 11:30 a.m. It's on our website, but you could also email Heather to find out more information about this. Debbie, we're really grateful to you for your leadership with this. And then, of course, you know that we have these preaching workshops every month. I'll introduce Shauna more fully in a second. Shauna is a professor at Pacific Lutheran Seminary, and this workshop is called Scripting a Sermon, the Wisdom of Filmmaking for Preaching. Next month, we'll have Raj Nadala from Columbia Seminary, whose workshop is called Preaching in the Face of Scandalous Wealth. I think those are really both going to be really interesting. And Shauna, we're glad you're here. Here's our website if you want to learn about any of these things. And if you don't already get our newsletter, the newsletter is the best way to stay in touch with us. You can also find and follow us on Facebook. And here's the YouTube channel. So I was saying before we started the recording, I think we probably have 35 videos for about preaching now. There are both shorter videos for the Cultivating the Gift of Preaching initiative and also longer videos from these preaching workshops. So hope you'll take advantage of those. And as I said, I will put those in the chat in a second, the playlist. And then finally, here's my information. I'd be glad to hear from you if I can support you or your congregation or your presbytery in any way. I'd be glad to hear from you. Now I want to introduce to you Shauna Hannan. Shauna is the leader for this event. As I said, she's a professor of homiletics at Lutheran Pacific Theological Seminary and has co-authored the book Scripting a Sermon, Using the Wisdom of Filmmaking for Impactful Preaching with filmmaker Gail Chandler. That came out last year. And she authored The People's Sermon, Preaching as a Ministry of the Whole Congregation, that came out in February 21. If you're interested in that, we do have a preaching workshop that Shauna led on that back from 2021. And Shauna, most importantly, is one of my friends. Well, most importantly to me, I don't know, most importantly to you, but most importantly to me, Shauna is one of my friends from the PhD program at Princeton. I was always so glad to learn from her in our seminars, to go on long walks together, to dream together, to think together about what the future might hold for us. I'm really grateful for her friendship and for her scholarship. She's the first person that has led 2 preaching workshops and a video for the Cultivating the Gift of Preaching. So she's hit the trifecta. We're looking for a home run maybe next year or something. But Shauna, we're really glad you're here. Let me open us in prayer, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Gracious God, we are thankful for the chance to learn together. Thank you for the opportunities we have to preach your word. And we pray, God, that as we listen and discuss and learn together, we would be more effective and faithful in that role. We thank you for Shauna, and we pray, God, that you would bless her and her ministry, as well as us, and that you would use us to be a blessing to others. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Let's give Shauna some happy hands and welcome her.
Thank you all. Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Chip, and always a delight. Back at you. Just really appreciate you. And my goodness, that rundown was impressive. So how blessed you all are to have these opportunities. And I said earlier before the recording started, but kudos to you all who actually showed up when you have access to the video later. So there will be some moments that you'll be invited to interact and engage, and we'll have a couple of small group options, and I hope that'll be helpful for you. But I'll just get started with a bit of introductory comments on this book. As you all know, the film and television industry has just really exploded in popularity. Always has been popular, but it has exploded as now we have shows that are available on the big screen, the bigger screens in our homes, and even these tiny little screens. We can access these things anywhere. It's as if everyone is wired for the screen. And that reason alone, I think, makes it worth a preacher's time to become adept at the language of film. It's what our congregation knows. It's what we know. And increasingly, people are becoming literate in the contemporary language of cinema. Whether we have a name for it or not, we're becoming literate in the language of cinema. Likely, maybe you'd agree with me, at a rate faster than our biblical and theological literacy. Theologians, well, actually, let me pull up as I say this, I want to pull up my PowerPoint here. Theologians Robert Johnston, Craig Detweiler, and Cutter Calloway have realized this. And here's a quote from them. Would somebody be willing to read that just to get another voice into the space?
Sure.
Thank you.
The cinema has become an important means of cultural communication, a contemporary language in need of understanding and explication. Some even believe that cinema studies is positioned to become the new MBA, a means of general preparation for careers in fields as diverse as law and the military.
Although cinematic literacy or even multimedia literacy isn't one of those accreditation standards for theological schools yet, I think we can add theological studies to that list that they're referring to. That's, an important thing for us to know. For many, visual images, whether still images or moving images, have replaced text as the central tool of communication. Think Snapchat. This substitution challenges theology's centrality of the word, and it revives a long-standing love-hate relationship between the faithful and images, the pious and images. The obstacles are especially palpable for this spoken oral, heard practice that we call and engage in preaching. After all, faith comes through hearing, not seeing, right? Romans 10. Despite these challenges, the Reformation spirit asks us theologians to embrace a new means of communicating the gospel. And my question for 10, 12, 15 years has been, might the screen, and along with it, a kind of cinematic literacy, be today's printing press of sorts? By that, I mean the way to get the word out, the way to get the conversation started. As seminary education continues to follow the higher education trend for online teaching and learning, and here we are doing it, right? Instructors recognize the need to enhance multimedia literacy. And that's not just in the seminary classroom. COVID-19 propelled you all into this multimedia literacy thing. The screen became part of our conversation. Clearly, the need for multimedia literacy is not going away, because now that we can gather in person, we've taken the best of this online stuff, and we've said, okay, like Chip said about the Synod of the Covenant, we'll try anything to get God's word out there. Yeah, this seems to be one of those things. Well, here's another quote from Johnston, Detweiler, and Calloway. Ed, can you read that one again? Or can you read again now this one?
Sorry, let me get myself off mute. Okay. Movies serve not simply as a commodity, but as a primary storytelling medium of the 21st century, interpreting reality for us, providing us with a common language, and acting as a type of cultural glue.
So I was really, thank you, Ed. I was just moved by this as I started to research for this book. I kind of knew this to be the case. I wanted to be a documentary film producer when I was in college. It never happened. Hey, there's time. But I started to really get back into this research, and I was just amazed at both theologians, biblical scholars talking about the importance of this language. So I didn't get around to writing a book about this until this Westminster John Knox Press series called the Preaching and series came out, and it was perfect because it requires both a homiletician and somebody in that other discipline, the and part, right, to co-author. So I found in Gail Chandler a good conversation partner and co-writer. She lives here in the Bay Area near me, but was in Hollywood as an editor. And we just had a grand old time putting this book together. I didn't know what was going to happen. And ultimately, the aim of the book and any of these kind of presentations I give around the book or this topic is to boost preachers' cinematic literacy, and which we define as the ability to decipher and interpret the content and language of films as told with pictures and sounds via acting, directing, cinematography, editing, in order to seek convergences between filmmaking and homiletics. And here's the big aim. Oh, you can see the sun is just coming up here. In order to seek convergences between filmmaking and homiletics for the purposes of enlivening the preached word, communicating the gospel, impacting our hearers and their world, our world. So I'm not in this for the filmmaking industry. I'm in this for the gospel. In his book, I'm not sure I might have to take a minute to close that. Is this okay? You can see the screen and hear me. It's fine, I think. There's a very interesting book by Timothy Cargill called Hearing a Film, Seeing a Sermon. Hearing a film, seeing a sermon. And in it, he notes that several writers have discussed the cultural prominence and importance of film by describing it as the lingua franca, or the cultural currency in which discussions about life and death, life and depth are conducted. And my hope is that preachers, you might tap into this lingua franca in order to assist churchgoers in discussions about life and death, or life and depth issues. So my question is for you. I'm going to give you just a moment to think about this. I realize that preaching and filmmaking are very different babies. And I just think it's really important for us to acknowledge those differences. So take a moment, if you would. I can't see anything in the chat. So Chip, if there's anything I should know, if there's a question or anything like that, you just chime in, and I'm completely interruptible. But what are some of those differences, would you say, between preaching and filmmaking that make you maybe even a bit wary of why are we putting these two things together? And as you speak those, I'm going to try to close this here. It's getting a little bright. Go ahead, speak out your thoughts.
I think one difference is there's a lot of technical work that needs to go into filmmaking that preaching doesn't require. Preaching has its own technical requirements, so to speak, but there's a lot more with film that you don't require up as a preacher.
Great point, Ed. Ed, is it Ed or Edward?
Ed is just fine.
Ed, okay. Thank you. Great point. Anyone else have a thought?
People tend to go into a movie knowing what the movie is going to be about, and they come to church and they don't necessarily know what the sermon is going to be about.
Wow. Thank you, Chip. Interesting. Yeah.
I'd say there's a difference between the primariness of a sermon being oral, being just heard, and that, movies involve both the combination of sound and pictures. Even though you're still looking at somebody preaching a sermon, it's far different it's a far different interaction than the moving pictures of media.
Yeah. Thank you, Charles. Well said. Nice point.
I mean, technically someone could get up and walk out of a sermon, but you can, with filmmaking, in a sense, with preaching, if you don't like the movie, you can just stop it and move to something else.
So you can fast forward, right? You
Yeah.
can't go, yeah, that's great, Ed. Yeah. James.
The, the sermon is real time. The filmmaking is whenever at the discretion of the viewer.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, in a way now, when we record everything, it's a little bit more like at the discretion perhaps, but yeah. Chip, did you have something else?
Yeah, I was going to build on what James said. Filmmakers get as many takes as they want, or as they can afford to get it right. If we're pre-recording a sermon, of course we can do that. But when we're up there, it's more like theater than making a movie.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah.
We hope and trust in the presence of the Holy Spirit while we're preaching, not necessarily something we're hoping for during a movie.
Interesting. We don't have the same hope and trust in a director.
And similarly, because it is dynamic, when we're preaching, we have the opportunity to change what we're saying, where something that's scripted and recorded is absolutely fixed.
Yes. Well said, Kristen. Yeah. Good. I mean, wow, that's a fantastic list. I'm impressed. Let me throw up a couple differences that I thought were important to name, and some of you have already named these. I don't need to read them all out. You can see that there. Yeah, you named these. One is live, one is pre-produced. A different kind of setting, which brings a different kind of expectations. That's not exactly true. Preaching can happen anywhere, but this one is big. It requires a product each week, if not multiple times a week, right? Nobody's really saying, okay, we need this film this week. Though in television, it's pretty fast paced, right? It's pretty necessary it's this constant pressure. Think of Saturday Night Live, right? Yeah, films though routinely take years to produce. And this one's interesting. Films are often entirely fabricated, and preaching is expected to be based on true events. At least that's the expectation. I do think there's room for imagination and creativity. I think there's a lot of room for that, but that might be for another day. But despite these differences between the two fields, I think there are enough similarities that I've thought, oh, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna proceed. And these are just a couple of things that I've noted that are important enough for me, that both professions seek to impact others or our world. And they both do so by paying attention to the reactions and subsequent actions of the audience, hearers, think audio, right? I know this about preaching. I didn't know this as much about filmmaking, and I learned this in the process. And I'm gonna give you a few quotes that might undergird this claim here. Then again, even though I knew this about preaching, in some ways, I don't know that we're as intentional as we could be about that. And I think that's one of the places that we can learn from filmmakers, which we'll get to in a bit. Secondly, filmmakers and preachers use, somebody referred to the technical, right? We use techniques that can be traditional, unconventional, everything in between, everything beyond, right? So we do have our language, our technicalities. The work is served by, I think, being collaborative and interactive. Somebody mentioned, the sermon is live. It could, as an audience, we have a chance to kind of change it. Maybe not so much in some of our situations, circumstances. And I like this. It's been said before. I think it was Sandra Willoughby in the book. Can't remember the name, but both crafts require a balance of perspiration and inspiration. I think she said it's 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration. I think that was her ratio. And Gail, my co-author, the filmmaker, calls the creation of films includes both the mundane and the magical. And when the film finally gets to us, it's the magical, right? But it's 90% perspiration, 90% mundane, just the rah, 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 watching the possible takes, right? And so that was an interesting discovery for me. There's a mystery in the process, even though there's some routine. And there's that kind of balance of mystery and routine. Anything else, any other resonances or similarities anyone wants to name that could be useful for us? And Chip, if there's anything in the chat, you could just read it out. I can't see it, but. Okay, well, it's enough for me to go on. So I went on and and ended up producing this book with Gail, and here we have the book, the scripting a sermon, as Chip referred to it. That wasn't the original name. That's an interesting process. At one point, the publisher wanted to call it Crafting a Blockbuster Sermon, which people loved, and I felt that was a little bit too high of an expectation. That would just freak people out. I was like, I don't want that. My goal isn't a blockbuster sermon, right? My goal is for a sermon that impacts these people in this place for right now. And next week we'll try it again. Chip.
Excuse me for a second. Yeah, Kristen added that it's the same audience every week.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a nice point. Nice point. Yeah. And in some ways, it could be similar that similar people come back to the next television show, right? For the series. Well, anyway, here are the chapters, and I put this up I'm going to give you an insight for a couple of these things, and then we're going to do a little bit more with chapter 1 and chapter 4 for the rest of our time. But I want to just kind of walk through here, and I'm going to be curious after I walk through these chapters, if there's something else you would have hoped to see. We couldn't do it all. Like maybe there'll be a second one, but this is what we ended up including. We call it the coming attractions. But the begin with the end. Shooting for impact. Shooting, obviously, in quotes, they shoot the film, right? The cinematography. We're gonna talk about this a little bit, so let me jump to the second one. Cast and crew collaborating for impact. In what way do we have a cast and crew in preaching? Who's your cast? Who's the crew? Maybe you've only thought about yourself as the cast.
A lot of times I think when we are preaching a sermon, we're dealing with a lot of different people, right? And a lot of times we're dealing with the people involved in the story of the scriptural text. That sort of connects us, like we stand historically very distant from them, but we kind of, a lot of times we bring them into the present with us. But then, the sermon's also being heard by the congregation who's present for it, and essentially they're all, it's the life of the community. It becomes the full cast in that case.
Yes, I love that, Charles. Keep that in mind. How is the whole gathered people part of the cast? And are they named? Are they unnamed extras? I mean, what's their role? I think this is key. Anyone else have a thought?
Shauna, Kristen added the liturgist, choir, and music director, tech team doing the audio switching.
Everything. We've gotten really good at involving so many people in the liturgy as this cast. And I think Marcia McPhee's book was really helpful on, like, for worship planning, she called it Think Like a Filmmaker. But what was interesting is there's not much about the sermon. It's like the sermon it's like when the director comes out or something. I don't know what the equivalent is, but the cast and crew kind of go away. When I was a kid, at the point of the sermon, all of the lights went down in the sanctuary. There was a special light on the preacher. I've never experienced this, but wow, it was theatrical. Very interesting. But I want to press a little bit this idea of the importance of collaboration. Yes, in the liturgy, but how about with the sermon? And Chip mentioned my earlier book, The People's Sermon, and certainly I think in kind of a Bible study ahead of time, you know, and that's where, in a way, the kind of blue skying or the imagination of what could be, blue skying in the writer's room. Everybody's just kind of throwing out ideas. What a great Bible study. But then we also think about, how does that maybe happen live? That scares me. Maybe it scares you too, but I'd like to become more adept at that and be a little bit more creative. Again, maybe that's another presentation, but I think that chapter will give you some ideas about how to incorporate others as your cast and crew, again, for the sake of a kind of impact. Let me move on just quickly, if I can, to chapter 3. I want to just name a couple of things about the opening. I loved doing chapter 3, writing chapter 3 and chapter 6, and taking a close look at how films open. Like, what are the first few minutes of a film? What's the last scene or the last few scenes? And really digging deeply. And one of the things I'm working on coordinating right now is gathering local pastors, like the day before a film festival, like a local film festival starts. And if I can coordinate it with the local film festival and get a few, advanced viewings of some of the films, I can work with their films and say, okay, what can we learn? And then we all go to the film festival, or people choose which films they want to see and say, okay, notice what's happening in the first 3 minutes. So I give this to you as a little bit of tip. We don't have time to do this now, but try this on your own. Pick 3 or 4 films, watch just the first 3 minutes and try to identify the impact that it has. What's it doing to you? And then if you really want to go deeper, say, how is it doing that? How did it just make me feel that way? How did it make me want to fast forward? How did it make me sit on the edge of my seat and I can't wait for the next scene? And then kind of compare and contrast. If we had a whole hour together, here are the 4 films that I would show, because I think the distinctions are clear. The variety in the possibilities for how to open a film, endless, but these 4 are fantastic. So, Chip, now I've got you remember the film Parasite, 2019 Best International Film? There's a free extended preview. Yeah, if Breaking Bad, not a film, but like a television series, the question is, where does it begin? Does it begin at the beginning of the story? It could begin at the middle. It could begin at the very end. How about, this was where I had a clip built in, Back to the Future, the original one in '85. Such an interesting opening with all the objects, these clocks, close-ups. Again, is it a wide shot? Is it a medium shot? Is it a close-up? Pay attention. What's the pacing of the opening? Another one I would say is this gorgeous film, also very difficult in some ways, this Human Flow. So those would be the 4 films I'd say, if you can access it, because you're going to see a wide variety of film openings. And so what's the learning here for us as preachers? The question is, do we engage a similar variety in the way we open our sermons, or do we always start in the same way? I'm not saying the same words. I'm not suggesting, do you always start with the same words? I mean, maybe you do, the same prayer or the same address, but could you add to your homiletical repertoire multiple ways of opening a sermon? Why would you choose what you choose? What's the hoped for impact? So that chapter gets at that. It's a great exercise. And that's the same thing for the closing. We could do that same thing. So we're going to do a little bit more with chapter 4. So just quickly, chapter 5, I want to give a little note about this cut by cut. Of course, my co-author, Gail, is an editor. So this chapter is just like fantastic. You know, really, the film gets made in the editing room. I mean, I don't know. You've got, I can't remember the ratio of the number of hours of film to the number of hours that actually get to, you know, it's like 2 hours max. Nobody wants to watch 80 hours of film. Nobody wants an 80-hour sermon either, y'all. I know it's all important, right? But the key is it all happens in the editing room. It's the rewrite. And you got to get rid of what doesn't belong. And that's so hard for us because we've done all this work. So how do you start putting things away? Tuck it back into your back pocket. You can still love it in your back pocket, but don't bring it into this sermon. You know, so I think that chapter is crucial. What do editors, film, television editors teach us about how to only pick those things that will lead to the impact we hope for? Really important chapter. And then the closing, and then the outtakes. This is funny. There were a bunch of things that we couldn't fit in. And we just decided, let's do it like outtakes, right? The tag at the end. And one of those actually is related to Chip, what you talked about. Usually people don't know what the sermon is about. I kind of said, why not send out a trailer? Why not create a trailer of, you know, the upcoming sermons thing? Give a little teaser. And then people are like, oh, the trailer gives everything away. Yeah, well, so what? They showed up, right? So that's kind of just a fun, playful section. And then we thought it would be helpful for preachers just to have a list of filmmaking terms. What else might you imagine? What were you hoping to see might be addressed as we think about the connection between preaching and filmmaking? In other words, what are the other resonances that you that work for you, or you'd like to think more about?
Shauna, Ed added in the chat.
Yeah.
Something I've done is send out the next week some of the extended edition parts of the sermon that I really wanted to include in the shared message, but hit the cutting room floor.
Fantastic, Ed. That is so great. Oh, fantastic idea. Why not?
And I've actually literally called them the extended edition. Part of that is I'm a total Lord of the Rings geek. And so
yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that.
Came out. So
that's brilliant. Where were you when we were writing this book, Ed?
I'd be happy to help with the next.
Okay, good. I love it. That's great. James, you've got something.
Hymnody and soundtrack.
Ooh, yes. You know what? We do have that in the outtakes. Something about soundtrack. Yeah. Fantastic.
What about storyboarding?
In storyboarding, yes, often used like in animation more. There's this other thing called carding, where it helps to kind of rearrange scenes. And in chapter 4, we address storyboarding and carding. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Love it. And you know, because if you what do we say? I mean, this is typically what I say to students. Like, we have about, as hearers in say a 15-minute sermon, we have, or 20-minute, we have the capacity maybe for about 5, 6 major moves. And sometimes sermons, unfortunately, have like 21 major moves or something. You know, it's just too hard to follow. And that kind of organization requires a kind of bird's eye view. Like, what are the major moves here? And that's where storyboarding can be helpful. Though storyboarding can get in like with animation with the exact scenes as well, both the moves and the sub moves.
Shauna Cassie says that about Ed's extended cuts. I love that that honors the cuts. Could even save them for the next time the text comes around to go in a different direction. That has 3 thumbs up. So Cassie, could you feel good about that? Even more, one more than Siskel and Ebert, since we're in the news, in the movie making thing. Barb added that she's doing a series for Lent. Maybe she'll call it Coming Attractions in the newsletter. And Kristen says, I call those my little darlings, the extended cuts, and have a file especially for them to use another time.
That's right. That's right. In the creative writing and filmmaking industry, that phrase with darlings, it's a little violent, but to call them, it is like, okay, your darlings. I don't even like to say it, but so it's, but they are your darlings. Love them, but don't bring them to the Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah. Great, y'all. This is great. This is exactly it. You know, I did 2 of these sessions at Princeton's Engel Institute for Preaching, and then I did some other presentations that were a kind of a precursor to the book, because I didn't want to write a book that really didn't matter to preachers. I want it to actually matter and help. And so I thank all those workshop participants and that, you know, those folks. And your ideas are fantastic. And yes, Ed, if there's another book, I'd love to gather people and say, what do you think about this? What needs to include? Help us understand the impact filmmaking has had on you. It is a collaborative effort, cast and crew. So this is great. I want to move on, and I want to get you talking just a little bit. So Chip, this is the point at which I invite you to put people in. It'd be great if it were just 2, because we're going to do this really fast, just for the sake of time. If you can set up for random pairs, I hope that's okay. And I guess if you don't want to participate, you just stay in the big room, but I hope you'll participate. Simply, I want you to each take 2 minutes, and I'm sorry it's just 2 minutes, but 2 minutes to identify, in fact, I think I have, identify an impactful scene from a film. And, you know, if you can't think of the exact, it'd be great if you could think of the scene, but at least an impactful film. But how were you impacted? And then, like, what was the impact? And then what do you think it was about that scene that made it impactful for you? And it could be just a quick scene. Maybe it's the visual, maybe it is the soundtrack, maybe it's the dialogue, maybe it's the clothing, maybe it's the, who knows what it is. But I'd love for you to just share with the other person a scene that was impactful or memorable, and then try to identify what was it about that scene that made it impactful, and then what's the impact. So, and then what's going to happen is at the 4-minute mark, I'm going to interject a slight change to the prompt. And then you'll have 2 minutes each again. I hope that's not too complicated. Just start with the 4 minutes, 2 and 2. We set, Chip?
This is so good.
Good, thanks.
You are
We're recording here, right?
You're so energetic. It's so great, you know.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. I was thinking about, you know, I don't remember if I told you, at first I thought I would write my dissertation on like using sitcom structures for sermon structures, you know, like I feel like, you know, they're all about the same length, you know, 22 minutes or whatever. And I got that idea because I was watching the director's cut for Sweet Home Alabama, or the director's like conversation, and he was talking about this is directly what you're saying. Like he was like, we had this really great scene of Reese Witherspoon and her college roommate, or you know, talking about this and this and this, and he said, but the movie was about her relationship with these 2 guys. It wasn't about her relationship with her roommate. So even though it was great, I had to take it out, and I was like, oh, that's what we do, you know, like so. It's bringing back that insight that I had. a long time.
Yeah, and I remember you as a real pop culture guru, and I'm not so much, I mean, but really that television series, it's not included here, but it is in the book. Like, which genre, which format would be most applicable to what we're doing? I even think film adaptation. I've been studying that a little bit. It's what we're doing. It's
Oh,
adaptation. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
have this whole section on genre and format, and I just did a script writing class for a pilot for a series, and the way you're right on. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think because people are coming back each week, could we do that in a way
Yeah,
like
right,
that?
right.
Yeah, somebody else will probably get to it before I do, but that's what I'm kind of working on here. And I
Yeah.
teach some of those components in preaching classes. It's fun.
Have you had a chance to kind of go the other way where with like it would be great if you also had the chance to bring the insights of preaching to filmmaking.
You know what? When we did our book launch, actually somebody asked about that. And no one's invited me to do that in the filmmaking community yet, but I would love it. They're not like beating down my door, like, please tell us about preaching.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a genre that's been around for 2,000 years. Filmmaking's what, 120 years old, 130 years old or something? Maybe not even that old, maybe like 100 years old. We've been preaching for thousands
Exactly. Yeah, I think, what is it? It is about like the 1868 or something. I should know that date. So 150 years. If I put this in the chat, can I send this?
I think you have to broadcast it somehow. Let's see, breakout rooms.
Can you do that? Broadcast?
Yeah, I can broadcast. Yeah.
Just say something like, now identify a memorable moment in a sermon, or an impactful moment in a sermon. What was the impact, and how did the preacher impact you? There's my little timer. So
Yeah.
for those people who are who get the recording.
We'll cut this part out.
Oh, okay, because we could talk to them.
We usually we
Yeah,
cut
I
this.
like what we just said. I love that you said that idea about the TV series, and get people to think like that. That's it. Yeah, this is fine with me if you include it, but
Okay.
yeah.
If you're watching this now, you can either fast forward to the next time that everybody else is on the screen.
Yeah.
Or you can keep listening, just like with a movie at home. You
Yeah.
can know what you're watching.
Right. More control if you just wait for the video.
Yeah.
But I love this idea. It may work at the Fargo Film Festival this year, where I gather a bunch of the local preachers, and then I'm hoping that film festivals will appreciate it. Your question about, have filmmakers asked about preaching? Actually, I've been essentially dismissed because people are worried about a Christian perspective coming in, and I'm not advancing a Christian perspective in this. I'm actually encouraging preachers to increase cinematic literacy for the sake of enjoying the films and then using them. I mean, what filmmaker wouldn't want that? So we'll see if that kind of thing works. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's like they don't realize that it's a genre of communication that happens to be, there's like it's a much bigger genre of communication than simply Christian proclamation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I mean, I would, it's kind of like reading, articles in the press about religious things, and you realize that most of the people writing about them are simply not very sophisticated in their knowledge of religious things. And it could be that filmmakers are also not very knowledgeable about, they haven't really thought about preaching. Of course, they're not showing up to one of the 40 preaching workshops that we have.
No, they need to go to Synod of the Covenant.
They need to come to our website, and then they'll know.
Yeah. Okay, Chip, can you give them in a moment, just the 1-minute warning to come back? Yep. That would be great. I know it's so quick, but Hopefully they had some fun. Oh, one group with the 3, they might not have had a great chance to share.
It's a good sign that everybody went. Sometimes people step away from Zoom, they end up staying out. So I'm glad everybody's engaged.
Good. Yeah. I'm one of those persons who sometimes uses that as an opportunity to steal away. Mm-hmm. Good. Well, they're really engaging. This is great. I love the chat as well. Thanks for calling that out.
James says it's murder your darling.
I know. I didn't want to say kill your darlings to other people. It's in
darling.
there, but I don't like to say. I just don't like to say it.
Yeah.
You're back, Doug. Good.
Yes.
All right. Were you in the group of 3?
No.
No. Okay.
Group of 2.
Okay. Okay. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. I know that time was just way too short, but I'm just curious to know, what was that like? What was it like coming up with a favorite or memorable or impactful scene for each? Was one easier than the other? Was identifying a scene in a film first, did that shape how you remembered a sermon? Any reactions? Was it difficult, fun?
I found it a little sad that I was able to come up with an impactful movie more quickly than with an impactful sermon.
Thank you for sharing that, Kristen. Yeah. Kristen, did I pronounce your name right, Kristen or Christine? Okay. Yeah. 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 And I think that's actually, I hear that quite a bit when I lead this. And I think that's something for us. It's a takeaway for us. Why is that? And not only do we have to accept that? Can we do more? Can we do something different that's faithful? Somebody else was going to say something. Well, you have the little task. I know some of you maybe didn't get to it because it was quick, but jot that down as a conversation you have with a fellow preacher at some point. Let's try this, and what can we learn from it? In some ways, it might be that it's like there's a little more dramatic pizzazz, perhaps, in a film, and it captures our attention in a different way. We can't help but be affected by it. I actually think we can do these kinds of things with our words. I actually think God shows up, the Spirit shows up and does things, and we have more available to us than we're using. And they can all be in the category of faithful. We get to decide. I don't think anything goes, and we get to decide what can I do and what is faithful. What I'd like to do is recommend. I'm going to share my screen here again. I like to take this film and The Shape of Water. Have any of you seen this film? Guillermo del Toro film. Chip, I think you're a fan maybe of Guillermo. Is that true?
Love him.
Yeah, so just a beautiful, beautiful film. And I get these I signed up for the New York Times Anatomy of a Scene. It comes every week, and you hear the director give like the director's cut. So Ed, when you send out your extended version, maybe you're doing like a director's cut too. But I would recommend watching a clip. And or you can just Google this, director's cut of The Shape of Water, where Guillermo del Toro talks through, here's what we're doing and why. Here's the camera angle. Here's why there's a close-up. But I recommend turn the sound off first. You're going to watch it twice. Turn the sound off, watch it, and then say, wow, what just happened? Where was I drawn in? Same thing I kind of asked you, but with the film here, if we had a little more time, we'd do that. And this is good exercise. What's the impact? What do you think made the impact? And then watch it again and listen to Guillermo del Toro's director's cut. Here's what we did and why, because here's what I hope will happen. I'm trying to, I have to skip that part. Sorry. The thing that I recommend to my students is whenever they turn in like a draft of the sermon, I want them in the margins to say, here's what I'm doing and why. They're giving me the director's cut. I do this for my sermon all the time. It's that 30,000 foot or the bird's eye view. I'm opening here because here's what I want to happen. And then I'm going here, and then I'm going here, and here's why I'm doing this here. I'm doing a close-up on the Samaritan woman. I'm taking the point of view of Peter. What am I doing in the sermon? And so I really recommend that kind of director's cut. Charles.
I actually really like that observation, because I feel like there's a lot of YouTube analysis or kind of like people whose kind of whole shtick or kind of thing they do is sort of analyze movie scenes, right, or analyze media in some ways to comment on those things that kind of give the perspective of what directors are doing, or what the cinematography, all those like different technical aspects. And we don't really see a lot of those commentary videos about, oh, this is what the pastor was doing in their sermon at this moment. This was they were trying to evoke. Listen how they're making this compare. We don't necessarily see that. So that's a very interesting reflection, and I appreciate that, especially in reflecting on the last sort of prompt we just did between what was an impactful movie scene, what was an impactful sermon too.
Yeah, thank you for that, Charles. I appreciate that you're willing to share that's helpful. We know, my guess is we intuit and we know what we do and why we do it. And I think if we bring that to kind of just bring that to the table and try to really articulate it, we'll find out like, oh, I just keep doing the same thing over and over. And if we do the same thing over and over, then everybody knows 7 minutes into the sermon, you're going to do, here's the background of the biblical story for 2 minutes. And say someone in your congregation, Bob loves that part. So he sets his watch to 7 minutes. He knows to listen in. Barbara hates that. She's like at minute 7 to 9. I'm like, somewhere else, right? Mix it up. There's a similar flow or movement to television shows, films. It's the 3-act structure. There's a 7-act structure, a 12-act structure. We have the same thing when we think about sermon form. So I make those connections at that point in the book as well. But I'm really recommending we're more aware of what we do and why, and then we broaden our repertoire of possibilities. Just if not for nothing else, just to keep it exciting for us. My goodness, this is hard. This is hard. Unlike a film that some people might say 8 years in the making, you got a few days. So I recognize this. You might take one tip and engage this for 2 months, and then it becomes natural. And then integrate another tip. And then, over time, wow, in 10 years, how has your preaching made such an impact? Don't expect big things overnight. That's just to set ourselves up for too much. It's too hard. It's too hard. It's a lot of work. But we can make little changes for big impact, I think. So movies change us, right? Television shows change us. Sermons change us too. At least we hope. And I think in this time of increasing cinematic literacy, not only have we developed the sense as moviegoers that films are supposed to affect us, but we have the capacity, as we've just shown you did in your pairs, to identify a film's impact beyond I liked it or I didn't like it. And my question, have you ever wondered, like I have, why so many people share with others a film's impact on them? And many, if not most, worshipers rarely talk with one another about their worship experience, especially the sermon. Why work so hard? We want people to talk about it. Imagine if churchgoers were impacted by a sermon and could share their experience beyond, I liked it or I didn't like it. So this kind of increasing a kind of homiletical literacy, doing maybe what you were saying just now, Charles, that begins with us, the preachers, and our commitments and our practices, sharing what we do and why with our hearers. Yeah, Ed.
So I have not done it in the congregation I serve now, but in my last two congregations, my wife, who is also a pastor, we did a series of theology at the movies groups.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason we did that was exactly what you were saying, was we have no problem telling people, I saw this movie on Friday night. It was incredible, or it was terrible, or whatever.
Yeah.
And what we were sharing with them was, can you use that as a vehicle for sharing about faith?
Mm-hmm.
So rather than just simply like essentially use that to say, yeah, I saw this thing and it really tied in with how I think God's is telling us how to love one another, or something like that. So that was our impetus with that. It wasn't necessarily the, get people to remember what they heard in a sermon and share in that way, but use something like a film, which people have no problem sharing about, as an opening to conversations about matters of faith.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I love it, Ed. I hope you do it in this congregation. It sounds like it really worked in the other one. Yeah, anything like that too. We're harnessing where impact is already happening for our congregation members. And we're saying, can you bring that here? Can you bring that excitement here? What do I need for you to bring? What do I need to do as the preacher for you to bring that, right? I think that's important. And the thing that I learned from filmmakers is that they're always thinking about the outcome, the impact on the audience. They're not afraid of talking about emotion. And I get worried about being manipulated, right? But we want movies to manipulate. We want to have certain feelings created. And their filmmakers are doing things specifically for that. And we have concerns about that with our preaching. And yet, is not the gospel it's pretty emotional. Like it's pretty, even if that emotion is, I feel affirmed, I feel accepted, I feel challenged. What is that? What do you want to happen? And do you think of that? And I want us to be this is our thing. I want them to be I want preachers to be as intentional about our sermons and the potential impact as filmmakers are. Now, I want to share, oh, Molly, you have a comment.
Yeah, I did a field ed internship in Jamaica. So I was in the Jamaica Baptist Union for the summer. And, as a Princeton student, I was taught to preach 12 minutes. And then I showed up in Jamaica and they said 30 minutes minimum. And I panicked.
Yeah.
Right? But one of the tricks I learned very early is that if I made any allusion to songs, the musician would start playing it.
Yeah.
And so I started purposely prompting musical interludes.
Love that.
Because I didn't want to hear myself talk that long, let alone in a culture beyond my own. But we had such a great time together if there were these interludes. So sometimes they'd get up and dance, or we'd get real into the song, and sometimes it was just the song playing. But your presentation reminded me of that coping skill that helped me out in the Baptist tradition. And I wonder, I don't know that every Presbyterian church would be amenable, or every musician might be able to do that with grace, but it was definitely a way for I started counting. I started looking forward to what's this going to look like on Sunday.
I love that. It's a soundtrack. You've got the cast and crew. So many great things about that. Yes, and keep doing it if you can, right? I love it. That is this you out of necessity you had to do this, but then you started being intentional about it because it was not only for yourself, but it was for the community. It's something they desired, and you had your ear to the ground around that. That's the intentionality I'm talking about here. Let's read. I have 3 quotes I just want to throw out there. Would somebody read that? John Boorstin.
A film is a universe where chance is never an excuse for anything. It is a series of hundreds of very particular decisions, and every single one of them must be felt. That is the agony and satisfaction of the process.
Or satisfaction. It looks weird on that screen right there. The agony and the satisfaction. How many can relate to that when it comes to sermon preparation? Like there's the perspiration and inspiration, agony, right? Like here it, Sunday's coming, but also the satisfaction. Molly, I heard that in your voice in that example, that oh my gosh, it's come together. Whoa. We just get this hit of dopamine or something when creativity surges. And then that creativity is also something that's faithful, that we think, oh, this will make a difference in these people's lives. But every choice, so many hundreds of choices. We're doing that too in crafting our sermons. Would somebody read this one?
The filmmaker organizes shots, camera movement, editing, and music to elicit certain reactions so that the viewers will respond right on cue, precisely as intended.
Yeah, there's no room for chance. It's so planned, so organized. And again, I've been so surprised at how filmmakers are adept at talking about human emotion and relationships. And I mean, it's stunning. I listen to tons of podcasts and they're like, what can we do for this? Not only for the experience in that 2 hours in the seat in the theater or on your sofa, but how can this have an impact beyond here? In the book, I talk about some filmmakers, particularly documentary filmmakers, actually have impact teams. That they go into communities, they prep people's ears. And I'm thinking, why do we not have impact teams? So maybe if you're interested in the book, I recommend that section. I think it would be interesting if we did this as congregations. Part of our cast and crew, impact teams. A last quote for the moment here. Would somebody read this Hitchcock quote?
One doesn't set the camera at a certain angle just because the cameraman happens to be enthusiastic about that spot. The only thing that matters is whether the installation of the camera at a given angle is going to give the scene its maximum impact.
So thinking about camera angle is important. You know, we do this with our sermons. We do this with our sermons as well. Where am I setting the camera right now? Wherever the camera is and whatever it's looking at is where we're putting our hearers into the story. Let me give you an example here with John, the story of the Samaritan woman. I tried to think about what would be, remember I asked like, how would you open? You don't always have to open at the beginning. Your sermon doesn't have to start at the beginning. Often films start in the middle or at the end. But let me give you an example here of, I'm jumping ahead just because of the time here. So let me look at my little, this is too much fun. You all are so engaging. Let me go to my little tip sheet. So what if I started, see if you can hear, is this a wide shot? You know what I mean by a wide shot, like a big landscape? And then a close-up, obviously, say you were like just right here. I just gave you a close-up, which is super disturbing for you, I'm sure. But so let me start by giving you, see if this is a wide shot, medium shot, close-up. What do you think? The midday sun is burning at its hottest. No one dares to venture out of the shadows of the houses in Samaria. Down the street, a woman emerges from an alley and walks toward the well. I'm setting up that scene, right? Charles, you're doing this. What does that mean? Wide shot? Pretty wide shot? I'd say a wide shot. You're getting the setting into the shot, right? But what if I want to start with a close-up? So just these three questions. Where's the camera? Well, it's where's the camera? What am I looking at? But also what's the depth of field and the lens, right? So close up. What if I did this? The bucket swings with ease, revealing its emptiness. A hand with puckered skin clutches the rusty handle and moves with a determined rhythm. Did you see it? Ooh, close up. Yeah. What would a medium shot be? I'm putting you on the spot here. So you had that wide, we got the whole big scene, we got the close up of the bucket. What about medium?
The group of people walked down the road, the feet kicking up dust in the sun. The one in the center quietly says, "So what were you talking about earlier?"
Fantastic, Doug. Wow, I'm totally impressed by that. Wow, that's amazing. Yes, yeah. Anybody else have a thought? What were you thinking when I asked that? Or if you don't want, Doug used the exact words, that was impressive. Or if you want to just describe what that medium shot might be, that might be easier. Yeah, go ahead, Ian. Oh, sorry. Oh, no,
no,
I'm sorry.
No, no.
No, not me, not me.
The thought of her walking out the door, and not the wide street, not the bucket, but just her walking out the door.
Yep. There you go. You've got the idea, right? And if you're stuck, you've got this empty page, think, okay, let me think in terms of wide shot, medium shot, close up. And let me just creatively do all three and then see what the feel is. And you can feel the difference, I suspect. And you can, and also just kind of gauge what's the impact? Is that there's a kind of intimacy in the close-up shot. And do you want that this moment? So be the cinematographer, be the director. I would, I'll give you this tip. We don't have the time for this either. I wish we had 2 more hours. But before you launch into the sermon crafting, hang out with that biblical story. I know you already do, but think like a director. And if you had to communicate to the set designer, this is what I want the set to look like. Just start writing, brainstorming, speaking it into your phone recorder. See the scene. And you have to communicate it to another person. They can't just like know what's in your brain. You have to communicate it. And then you have to communicate to the camera person where you want them to be. And are they going to like pan? Is it going to be close up, wide shot, whatever? Who's the protagonist here? Who do you need to be on? If you see the scene first, you will help us see it. Even, I'm not saying you need a screen, really. You're doing this with your words. It's still an oral practice, but you're thinking in terms of a filmmaker and actually seeing the scene. So one great Bible study thing would be, if we had time, I'd have you all go into breakout rooms and say, let's take that story of the woman at the well, and let's have you be the director, and the rest of the people in your group, they're the cast and crew, and you're going to be in the writer's room and say, what do we need to do? How are we going to start this thing? Are you going to start with the close and talk through it? Oh no, I think we should start here because that would intrigue people. And then let's go here. Right there, you have a potential flow of the sermon, or that section of the sermon at least. See what I'm saying? Super creative, super fun. It's Bible study. That's going to get locked into your memory. That'll have an impact. And then when it comes time to proclaiming that message, it's going to lock into the memory and have an impact on your hearers as well, I think. Okay, one more thing I'm going to show you. And this has to do with scripting. Like, this is also in that scenes beats chapter. I think it's chapter 4. So I have to skip through cinematic log lines, but it's there. Here we have this story, John, and I just started playing with this. Wow, now you're all in the middle of this darn, let's see. You read that there. Hopefully you can see it just fine. You know the story, right?
We see it. Donna, we see it fine.
Good, thank you. Okay, just to kind of prompt, you know the story about this sort of exchange between Jesus and Pilate. Now what I want to do is pull up, I want to share this. Do you see this? Stop share for a moment. I gave you this a little intro into. Okay, now I'm going to share. Sorry, little snafu on my end. Hopefully you can see it. Oh yeah, okay, now I see it. So usually we see a blob of words, which a blob is not that meaningful. So one of the first things I do is just put it into Word and start doing something different. What do you notice that's different about this iteration?
It's more like a script.
Yeah, it's like it's story. It suggests there's a dialogue here, right? I don't even see, I see quotation marks up here, but I don't, this just, I took out the verses because they can be distracting. And all of a sudden I feel differently about it. It's a story. I feel engaged in a different way. I did not change a word. I did not change the order of the words. All I did was put it in a different form. And then, as you just got the sneak preview, I sometimes do this. I literally do it like a script, which is always in Courier 12, well, typically. And there are rules for scripting. And it's just Pilate, Jesus, Pilate, Jesus, Pilate, Jesus, right? And it helped me. The only thing I added here, but I used the information from the story, are these, and they're called slug lines. Super fun. Slug lines always say interior or exterior, because you need to let the lighting people know what kind of lighting you need, right? It's technicality. But where are we? What's the scene? So I put slug lines in a biblical story. When does it move? Like, when do we need a new set? And if we're not efficient about this film is going to cost way too much money. And if we're not efficient about this in our preaching, we're going to lose people's attention. It's too costly. We want to know where, so we just start with the scripture reading, and then the kind of, the description of action here, and then the dialogue. And just super fun and engaging. This is part of my interpretive process. When I simply lay it out differently, I learn something different about the story. And my recommendation to you is to do that with the biblical story. And then I recommend, let's see if this is the right one. Oh, I have to go forward again. I recommend putting slug lines in your sermon. What if I'm preaching a sermon on a text? They're at the Sea of Galilee. I put the slug line in. They're outside. And then, I move on and I do the sermon. And then the next move I make, oh, now we're inside. I say, today we're gathered here in the fellowship hall or whatever. Maybe it's the sanctuary. I've come to the present. We're inside. Where are we located? And if you find that you have 32 slug lines in your sermon, that's a little bit too much for us to handle. That is going to be a costly situation. So slug lines are fun. Very last thing I'm going to show you, and I know it's quick, but you can take your time with it in the Zoom video if you want. Log lines. A log line is like a quick one-sentence summary of what the movie is about. And it's basically used to pitch the film to people with cash to help fund the film. That's where the similarity breaks down. But let me ask you, let me give you an example here and see if you can guess. Where's my little... How about this? How about this log line? What film is this? Here's the log line. A wealthy old woman remembers a love affair she had as a young woman on an ill-fated luxury liner.
That's Titanic.
Titanic, you got it, right? So immediately we know this isn't about a young person. This isn't about somebody who's down and out. It's a wealthy, right? It's somebody's looking back at their life. How about this one? Tougher. A divorced cinematographer dives deep into the ocean to befriend an octopus while seeking reconnection with his son.
My octopus teacher.
Yeah, right? So how fun to play. Usually there's the protagonist, antagonist, and there's conflict. What is at stake here? What do you think the log line would be for that John 18 with Pilate and Jesus and that? So you know how in Friends they say, oh, the one about Joey and Chandler or the one about Monica, or what's the log line for John 18?
Jesus and Pilate sit down for coffee.
Okay, Ian, yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, good. What's the conflict there? What's at stake? That would be one thing you'd want to add there. There's a bit of a rub. There's a bit of a rub. Get that into the log line. Any thoughts? You're on the spot, y'all, I know.
Governor and arrestee discuss what is truth.
Doug, so fun. Yeah, you've got antagonist, protagonist, conflict. What's at stake? Our scripture is scandalous, right? Something's at stake for the world, for you, for me. God is trying to get through to us. Something's at stake. And it's so fun in a Bible study to teach people about that kind of log line and then have them compare. You find out what's important for people. Who are the key players? What's the key action? And then the challenge is do this with your sermon. What's your sermon's log line? Okay, all of that's in the book if you want more. Let me just say, just as a reminder, filmmakers want to create something that makes the audience react. Film critic Roger Ebert said that film is an empathy machine. If filmmakers want something to happen to the viewer, a filmmaker I know, Jason Wilkinson, says apathy is our worst enemy. Good or bad equals success. Indifference equals failure. The same may be true of our creation, the preacher's creation, the sermon. We want something to happen to the hearers. While rarely does a single sermon move mountains, it can move us to feel something and maybe even to do something. Thank you all for your engagement and your attention. So fun.
Thank you.
Let's give Shauna some happy hands. We've got about 5 minutes, so there might be time for a question or two. Who has a question or a comment or a perspective to add? Shauna, you have captured all of our... Oh, James, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Do you have a question or a comment?
I have found satisfaction in preaching the script as Shauna proposes, taking out all of the Jesus said, Pilate said, there was a book published called The Dramatized New Testament that did that. It's out of print, unfortunately, but it shortens and enlivens the gospel quite a bit, because you're not stuck with your head down going, he said, she went to the, that we often hear. And does the Lutheran Church have lay readers, or do you read this gospel?
Yeah, both. You see both. Yeah. I tend to, if I'm preaching, whatever pericope I'm most focusing on, I like to read it. Not to be overly dramatic, but I put the emphasis, put the pauses. I mean, the proclamation begins with the reading of scripture. And so I like to connect that. So I like to do it. I also like for other people to be involved. And then it's really fun when you can really work with them. Nice comment, James. Thank you. And thanks you all for your questions and comments throughout this, and your engagement.
How about one more?
No.
Going once, going twice.
All right, I have a quick question.
All right,
Ian.
This is Ian. Just do you have any thoughts about the company Angel that comes out with all the Christian movies and themes?
Yeah, interesting. I don't know it too well. I appreciate the question, Ian. There's a distinction in what this book is. There are a lot of books on, film and religion or theology and religion, and most of them focus on religious films. Really some of the first films were in the 19th century were religious films. There's a little interesting history that we included in this book, but there are religious films, and then there are sort of theological topics that appear in and emerge from films. We did not stick to those. We didn't focus on those. I'm looking at the craft of filmmaking, the craft of screenwriting, cinematography, the technicalities, the mundane and hopefully the magical, as Gail calls it, right? So we didn't limit ourselves to certain topics or certain, Christian focused or religious focused films. We used all of filmmaking to ask, what are their practices and decisions, intentions, in order to have the impact it has that people are talking about. And those of us who have a particular faith, of course, I'm going to bring that lens to anything that I read or view or whatever, and try to experience it in a way like, how does this have an impact on my life? Yeah, so I'm not opposed to people making, films that have religious resonances or anything. It's just that we wanted to really focus on craft here. So I didn't dig into that so much, Ian, but I appreciate the question.
Okay.
Shauna, thank you so very,
Yes.
very much. I think if any of you, Shauna has just a few minutes. If any of you want to stick around afterwards and talk to her about anything specifically, she has a couple of minutes to do that. Otherwise, I want to invite you back next month, Raj Nadella from Columbia Seminary on Preaching in an Age of Scandalous Wealth. Even the title, that's a good slug line, you call it? That's a good slug line.
Log line, that's the log line.
That's a good log line for
the slug line is interior and exterior every day, all the time.
The slug line will be on your Zoom.
Good.
The log line is Preaching in an Age of Scandalous Wealth. Shauna, thank you very much, and God bless all of you as you go out to preach the word. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.